Ahoj všichni, it's Jen from Dream Prague, bringing you a weekly dose of a foreigner's perspective on life in the Czech Republic. When you first meet Czech people and they find out you're a foreigner, one of the first things they ask is, do you like Czech food or do you like Czech beer? And very shortly after that, they will say, and what do you think of the Czech mentality? Huh? It seems like such an odd question. I rarely think about the mentality of people, let alone a whole nation of people. Mentality is defined as the singular way of thinking of a person or group. So to ask a foreigner, what do you think of our way of thinking, strikes me as kind of odd. First, because there's no one American mentality. That would be impossible to define. We would resent the idea that anyone would want to lump us all together in one singular way of thinking. And second, Americans don't really care what other people think of them. I don't think the French care. I don't think Brits care. I don't think Germans care. But the fact that many Czechs have personally asked me this question, I think says a lot about the Czech mentality. So in this video, I'm going to explore the very idea of there existing a Czech mentality and see if I can come up with an answer that's taken me over 10 years to nail down. And I fully admit that this is a sweeping generalization. I want you to know that, of course, not all Czech people are like this, obviously. But because they keep asking me, I will attempt to answer. Now, this video is only part 1, and part 2 will come out next week. And if you don't want to miss it, be sure that you are subscribed and you hit the bell, because the bell is what allows YouTube to let you know that the video is live. Tak, jedeme dál. The idea that Czechs think they even have a Czech mentality is interesting to me. I look at some Americans and I'm like, I have nothing in common with that guy. I can barely understand his English. But Czech people really think of themselves as Czech. Besides the language and the culture and the food, they share a very specific political history. 40 years of communism and repression helped shape that thinking. After communism, rediscovering their place in the international world as Central Europeans, too Eastern to be West, too Western to be East. That's a very specific feeling that they share with other Czechs. If you ask any 10 Americans, what is the American way of thinking? You're gonna get 10 different answers. But that's because our experiences are so wildly different from each other. In fact, more and more people in the US are starting to fragment and think of themselves in terms of not being American, but more in terms of their ethnicity or their race or their religion instead of a shared American nationality. Whereas I think Czech people primarily identify as Czechs First. They might have disagreements with each other, their politics might differ, but they consider themselves to share this Czech mentality, which I'm trying to put my finger on in this video. The Czechs care what you think about them. That's why they asked you the question in the first place. They are very self-conscious about how outsiders perceive them. I think particularly how Westerners think about them. Although someone made the recent point to me that in the past they cared about what the Easterners thought of them. But the West is more in vogue right now, if you will. Perhaps it's because Americans are so self-centered, like in a collective way, and the French are just kind of like too snobby to care, and the Italians are too busy talking over each other, that none of us care too much about the perceptions of our cultures by outsiders. You either like us or you don't like us. That's your prerogative. But the Czechs are really curious about outsider opinions. Just as an example, this video I made for foreigners to get a little taste of what Czech people are like, but how many of you who clicked on this video about Czechs are in fact Czech? So when you finally do express your opinion of the Czech mentality to them, They're really flattered if you have anything good to say. It warms their hearts to be liked. But you cannot say too many good things because they will think you are lying, or at least not giving the whole truth. Don't get me wrong, Czechs are very proud of their culture, but I believe they also suffer from a collective low self-confidence in compared to other nationalities. Often I'll get comments from Czech viewers who are like, "You're too nice. Tell us what you dislike about us." It's almost as if they feel most comfortable when they are criticized. And they probably will agree with your criticisms. They're often the first to admit the flaws in Czech character. Like, look, you can't expect so much from us. We're Czechs. Underdog mentality. Paradoxically, even though the Czechs like to think of themselves as the underdogs, they also have a lot of pride in national achievements, and they really want to educate you about them. There have been many famous writers and composers and inventors, and they are immensely proud of them. It's very interesting where this underdog mentality meets the national pride. It's almost as if they want to proclaim the greatness of their nation, but they are self-deprecating of themselves as individual Czechs. Countless Czech people have told me that Czech people have a very specific sense of humor. And they also believe that they are the only ones with that sense of humor. The very idea that there is a particular Czech sense of humor is definitely part of the Czech mentality. In fact, if they think something is funny, they will say, "Oh, well, yes, this is a very Czech sense of humor." They don't consider that something could just be universally funny. If it's funny to them, it's Czech humor. Now, I will say that Czech humor is different from many other types of humor in that there are pretty much no boundaries. The darker the joke, the funnier the joke. In the US, we have an expression, too soon, which usually means that you can't make a joke about a tragedy for at least some time has passed after the tragedy's happened. And the Czechs would abhor that. I think for them, the only way to endure a tragedy, and they've seen a lot of tragedy, is to inject humor into the situation. So in that way, I definitely think Czech humor is unique and definitely a big part of their mentality. Czechs have a reputation for being cold to outsiders, and I find that to be true. There's absolutely no effort to make small talk or to find out more about you or to introduce themselves to strangers. I've lived in the same building for 10 years, and I sometimes find my neighbors like trying to quickly run into their apartments and close the door before I turn the corner just to avoid saying "Dobrý den" to me. I've also worked in places and been in other group settings where you could be around a Czech person for months or even years, and if they've never been introduced to you, they will continue just pretending that you don't exist. Now, this could be because I'm a foreigner. I think many Czechs are shy that their English is not good enough to converse with foreigners, and so they'll just avoid you. Ironically, as a rule, their English is always 10 times better than your Czech. I've read that this distrust also stems from the communist times when neighbors were actually reporting the activity of other neighbors. So you can understand why people would want to mind their own business and not get involved with people they don't know. Not to mention that every time foreigners come to the Czech Republic, they're always pushing the Czechs around and foisting some new oppressive government on them. The Austrians, the Germans, the Russians. The Czechs are also resentful of the EU telling them that they have to take in a certain amount of migrants. I think they feel like the great big dumb decision makers in the world, like the US and Russia and Germany and the UK, are the reasons why we have all these wars. And they're like, why are you forcing us to bear the costs of your mistakes? Now, this attitude is changing right now with the influx of Ukrainian refugees, because I think for many Czechs, first, the Ukrainians are Slavs, just like the Czechs, so they don't feel entirely foreign to Czech people. And secondly, the Czechs have been victims of Russian aggression, so they can relate to the Ukrainians in that way. But on the whole, with regards to foreigners, they're just not that interested in having more of us around. If they wanted to listen to weird accents, they'd drive to Brno. Look at what these Praguers have done to me. Brno, I love you. I'm coming to visit soon. So these are just a few of my impressions of some of the characteristics of the Czech mentality. In next week's video, I'll give you the top 5. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, and also leave your comments below. I'd love to know what you think. Tak, uvidíme se příští týden. Ahoj.